Somewhere between time zones and trust, at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, my life detonated quietly in the glow of a laptop screen. It was 2:30 a.m. The cabin lights had dimmed into that eerie purgatory that exists only on red-eye flights. Part sleep lab, part suspended reality. I was wide awake, headphones off, eyes tired but sharp. We had just cleared São Paulo's airspace, the faint orange glow of the city shrinking into a constellation beneath the clouds. That's when it arrived. A ping. Just a harmless little ping. One new message. Subject line: termination notice, effective immediately. I didn't panic, not right away. I blinked, once, twice. The screen hadn't glitched. It was real. Your employment with Venturon Technologies is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Your access has been revoked. Do not return to any company property. That was it. No explanation, no thank you, no decency. Signed, of course, by Grayson Hart himself, the CEO. The same man who, just 2 weeks earlier, had shaken my hand in the boardroom and said, "You're the only one I trust to close this." I read the email again. And again. My fingers trembled slightly, less from fear than from the sheer absurdity of it. I had just spent 10 straight days flying across continents: Tokyo for onboarding alignment, London for compliance strategy, São Paulo for the final negotiations. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in any city. I hadn't spoken to anyone not related to this deal in a week. And now? Now I didn't even work for the company I was saving. The silence in the cabin pressed in. I looked around. All those half-asleep executives and consultants curled in their pods, breathing softly beneath their cashmere blankets, the flicker of cabin screens reflecting off champagne glasses and eye masks. None of them knew that the woman in 2A had just been professionally executed mid-flight. My heart didn't drop. It calcified. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I reached under my seat and pulled out the second laptop. Matte black, unbranded, encrypted. The one no one at Venturon even knew existed. It powered on with a soft whir, and the login screen greeted me like an old friend. Within seconds, I was inside my private sandbox, a mirrored archive of everything they thought they had control over. Contracts, strategy drafts, internal timelines, an entire shadow infrastructure I'd been building in silence for 6 months. They thought they'd caught me unprepared, but I had known. I had known the moment they added Grayson's daughter, Mallory, to the Trident project for visibility. I had known when I opened the final proposal deck and saw her name in the metadata, even though the bones, the blood, the strategy of that deck were all mine. She had rearranged a few bullet points, added a transition slide, and suddenly she was the architect. They didn't just want to take the deal, they wanted to erase me from it entirely. But this email? This was the push I'd been waiting for, the one that turned quiet readiness into silent retaliation. Travant. That was the name on the encrypted drive inside the laptop. No public filings, no press release. Just a word. A shell company formed under a blind trust, staffed with exiles and allies. Engineers, legal advisors, former Venturon employees who had been overlooked, undermined, and slowly frozen out of the company's soul as politics replaced purpose. I hadn't built Travant out of spite. I built it because I'd seen what was coming. I'd seen what Grayson was turning Venturon into, an empire of nepotism where loyalty was transactional and strategy was ornamental. Travant wasn't just a backup plan. It was the better version of what we'd started. And as I sat in that cabin with my career severed midair, I realized something strange. I wasn't devastated. I was liberated. There was a quiet rage beneath my ribs, yes. But there was also clarity. For the first time in years, no one owned me. Not my calendar, not my language, not my outcomes. I opened the terminal window and ran a silent test ping to our shadow servers. Everything was still online, secure, hidden in plain sight. Then I opened the encrypted folder labeled Trident. Inside were alternate drafts of every document, Every clause, every projection, refined, stripped of fluff, designed not for PR, but for performance. The version Venturon had was the decoy. This was the real pitch. I'd presented enough of it during negotiations to earn trust, but not enough to lock in without me. And now? Now I was the only one who knew how to complete the handshake. I closed the laptop gently, rested it on my lap, then leaned my head back and stared at the darkened ceiling of the aircraft. They thought they'd buried me with a single email, but all they'd done was give me permission to begin. They say betrayal is a blade you don't feel until you've already started bleeding, but sometimes it's not a blade at all. Sometimes it's a whisper, low, soft, and meant to disappear behind closed doors. Except I heard it. And once you hear it, you never unhear it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We were somewhere over the Atlantic when I finally let myself feel it. Not just the sting of that email, but the insult of it all. The aftertaste of erasure. I'd been fired mid-air, no explanation, no conversation. Just a faceless corporate execution at 2:30 a.m., delivered in grayscale font from a man who once called me our best closer. I should have seen it coming. And maybe I did. Maybe I'd been feeling the ground shift for months, pretending the tremors were just coincidence. But memory has a cruel precision, and as I sat there in that dim cabin, laptop on my lap, I thought about the glass-paneled boardroom on the 32nd floor. That day, that deal, it was supposed to be unsalvageable. $400 million, a European consortium with enough red tape to choke 3 legal teams. They had walked out mid-negotiation, leaving behind chaos and an entire C-suite in panic mode. Legal was shouting, finance was deflecting. The VP of Global Sales was sweating through his shirt. No one knew what to do. I didn't wait to be asked. I picked up the abandoned binder, rewrote the core terms in 20 minutes, and requested a direct call with the consortium's lead negotiator. No slides, no buffer. Just me, them, and truth. By morning, the contract wasn't just revived, it was expanded. 2 new territories, better terms, a record close. Grayson called it a miracle. I called it Tuesday. That win should have been the turning point. They toasted to it in the executive lounge that night, poured overpriced champagne, shook my hand like I was one of them. Grayson clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Now that's the kind of leadership we need at the next level." The whisper started the following week. Executive Vice President. Global Strategy. My name was in the hallway chatter. People assumed it was a done deal. HR pinged me for an updated bio just in case. An assistant asked if I wanted to tour the corner office suite. I should have known better. A week passed, then another. The promotion turned into a consideration, and then into a black hole of silence. I tried to believe it was just bureaucracy. HR delays, restructuring maybe, until that day in the adjoining conference room. I was preparing a pitch portfolio, alone, as usual, when I heard the boardroom door click open. The panel had stayed slightly ajar, just a sliver. Enough for words to drift through. "She's brilliant, but let's be honest." A chuckle. "She walks into a room and no other guy wants to speak." Another voice, lower. "She dominates every pitch, makes it hard to, manage the narrative." Then the final blow. "She's not EVP material, she's field ops, great in motion, but not a fit for the long game." Field ops. Like I was some elite fixer they could send into fires, but never let sit at the table where the matches were handed out. I stood there, portfolio in hand, heart sinking past my heels. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw open that door and ask them to repeat every word to my face. Instead, I closed the folder, walked back to my desk, and got back to work. Because that's what I always did. That's what they counted on. For years, I had been the cleanup crew for their strategic messes, the invisible hand stitching together deals, massaging egos, translating impossible into delivered. I spoke 4 languages. I operated across time zones. I knew the politics of negotiation better than some of our board members knew the alphabet. And every time something fell apart, I rebuilt it. Quietly, flawlessly, thanklessly. They didn't promote me not because I lacked merit. They didn't promote me because I didn't make them feel powerful, because I didn't shrink in meetings, because I didn't soften my tone, because I spoke in full sentences and didn't apologize for it, because I was decisive and unflinching and I didn't pretend to be confused by things I'd already mastered. And worse, because men in power don't like to feel outmatched, especially by someone they expect to smile more. I scared them, not with arrogance, with competence, and in their world, that was far more dangerous. So they kept me just close enough to use, but never close enough to elevate. And when the time came to choose between merit and control, they chose control. They gave my title to Mallory Hart, a woman with half my experience and none of my victories, because her ambition was palatable and her last name matched the logo. The worst part? I didn't even resist at first. I told myself it was just a temporary oversight, that maybe they'd correct it. Maybe Grayson would realize what he'd done. But now, sitting on a plane with no return ticket, I saw the truth for what it was. It wasn't an oversight. It was a strategy. They never intended to keep me at the top. I was too inconvenient, too remembered, too powerful. And now they'd fired me in the sky, hoping to erase me before I could land. But what they didn't know was this. I had already landed. Just not where they expected. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream, doesn't tear through you in one violent flash. It seeps in, slowly, like water under a door. You don't realize how deep it's gotten until you're already drowning. That's how it felt when I saw my name removed from the Trident deck. But before that, before this plane, before the firing, there was a moment when I still believed loyalty would count for something. That if I kept my head down, did the work, protected the people above me, someone would eventually look back and say, she mattered. I was wrong. It was 6 months ago, a Wednesday. The kind of day you forget until you can't. The office was abuzz with pre-launch chaos. We were preparing for a high-profile client demo, a Singapore-based fintech partner who was considering a $70 million investment into Venturon's new cloud security suite. Grayson's daughter, Mallory Hart, had just been brought on as a strategic advisor, a title with no definition and even less merit. She had no background in data architecture, had sat through maybe 2 compliance briefings, and had once asked if end-to-end encryption meant the emails were literally invisible. I remember that because I laughed. I couldn't help it. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. But nepotism has no need for credentials. What Mallory lacked in knowledge, she made up for in pedigree. Grayson's golden girl, untouchable. That day, she was supposed to lead the demo. Against my better judgment, I let her. I even helped her rehearse her talking points. Tighter language, simpler visuals, fallback phrases in case the client asked something technical. Then it happened. 10 minutes into the call, one wrong click, one unsecured file. A live screen share error that exposed personal data from an internal beta test. Names, emails, partial credentials. Enough to send legal into a tailspin. The client ended the call early. They didn't even fake politeness. By noon, Grayson was on the line with me. His voice wasn't angry, it was desperate. "Clean it up, Charlotte," he said. Quietly. She didn't mean to, she just didn't know. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that she wasn't trained, or that she had bypassed 3 compliance protocols to move faster. I just did what I always do. I fixed it. I pulled in favors from our legal team, reframed the breach as a contained beta artifact, redirected attention to our rapid patch response, took the media call myself, made sure Mallory's name never appeared in a single sentence, and when it was over, when the crisis had been swallowed up by silence, I waited for the call. The thank you. The acknowledgement. It never came, but something else did. 2 months later, we were preparing for the first formal presentation to the Trident Group, a deck I'd been building for 6 weeks. Data modeling, regulatory strategy, phased rollout diagrams. Every word, every chart was mine. Then one night, I opened the shared drive to do a final polish before our London call. The author field had changed, Mallory Hart. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch. Maybe she'd copied it by mistake. But as I clicked through, I saw the edits. Subtle, meaningless changes. Rearranged bullets. A slide title renamed. Cosmetic tweaks designed not to improve, but to rebrand. She hadn't built the house. She'd rearranged the furniture and put her name on the deed. I stared at the screen for a long time. The lines of text blurred. My chest felt hollow. I could have spoken up. I could have called Grayson, laid it all out. I had version histories, timestamps, proof. But I didn't. Because I knew what they'd say. They'd call it collaboration. They'd say I was being territorial, controlling, emotional. That word, emotional. It's the catch-all defense for the mediocre when they're called out by the competent. So I said nothing. I left her name on the file. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized my loyalty had never been mutual. I had taken every bullet for that company. Silent, steady, surgical. And now someone else was using my work as a stepping stone. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. Mallory stood at the front of the London boardroom 2 days later, reading my words like she'd written them. Her voice quivered on the compliance slide. She couldn't explain the latency buffering clause. But the client smiled politely, and Grayson nodded like a proud father watching his daughter ride without training wheels. No one looked at me. No one even remembered who built the bike. And still, I said nothing. Because back then, I hadn't given myself permission to fight. But now, here, in this sky where they thought they could bury me, I knew better. My silence had been their shield, but they'd just taken it away. And now they were going to find out what it really meant to lose me. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. Not really. It was the fact that I had seen it coming, and still, I'd chosen to stay silent. Like maybe, if I kept fixing things long enough, someone would finally see what I was worth. But they didn't. They saw usefulness, not value. They saw resilience and mistook it for submission. They saw how I kept showing up, no matter how many times they handed my work to someone else with a prettier title and a neater narrative. Especially her. Mallory Hart. Grayson's daughter. Strategic advisor with no strategy and even less advice. When they hired her, they framed it like mentorship. A bridge between generations, Grayson had said at the all-hands meeting. Mallory's here to learn from the best. That was a lie. She wasn't here to learn. She was here to replace me. It started with a smile. A few curious questions. How did you structure the risk clause in the Luxembourg deal? Can you forward me the Tokyo proposal from last year? I answered everything. I even offered to walk her through the logic. I believed in sharing knowledge. I didn't hoard it. And when she stumbled, when she exposed sensitive data during a live client demo, who do you think cleaned it up? It was a Thursday, late morning. A major client from Singapore was logged in for what should have been a routine product preview. Mallory was leading. Her voice shook a little when she spoke, but I gave her a reassuring nod. She had the slide deck. She had my notes. She had every ounce of preparation she needed, because I gave it to her. But when she minimized the presentation and opened her desktop folder to find the analytics sheet, something went wrong. One of the files wasn't sanitized. It contained partial datasets, live beta data, client names, email fragments, metadata that had no business being visible. It stayed on screen for maybe 6 seconds. But 6 seconds is forever when you're showing someone your carelessness. The call ended early. Polite apologies from our clients. Silent horror on our side. Mallory turned to me after the call, pale and shaken. I didn't realize, she started, but I was already dialing legal. It took 48 hours of nonstop work, legal maneuvering, compliance gymnastics, press suppression. But I did it. I kept her name out of every internal memo. I took the media call myself and spun the breach into a testing protocol mislabel. I even rewrote the retrospective report so that the incident sounded like an automated sync error. Mallory didn't thank me. Grayson didn't call. I wasn't surprised. But 2 months later, When I opened the Trident deck I had been painstakingly building, I saw something I hadn't expected. Her name, Mallory Hart. Author. Not mine. All of my strategy slides, the market forecasting, the compliance roadmap, the tiered onboarding structure, were untouched. My language, my logic, my model, all intact. But the author field changed. The edits were laughably small. A line break here, a reworded header there. Style, not substance. And yet, there it was. Her name, staring back at me, bold and final. For a long time, I just sat there, hands still. No music, no noise. Just the thrum of blood in my ears, and the realization that I had given these people every ounce of my best. And they had fed me back a grave in return. I didn't call her. I didn't confront anyone. Because I knew what would happen. I'd be called emotional, territorial, overreacting. They wouldn't see theft, they'd see drama. Because the moment a woman defends her labor, the narrative flips. And so I stayed silent. I let her present the deck. I let her fumble through my technical frameworks. I sat at the far end of the conference room while she smiled through answers she didn't understand. I even nodded along. Because by then, I had already made a different decision. I wouldn't fight for a place at their table. I would build my own. That night, in my apartment, still in my blazer, still wearing the mask of professionalism I hadn't taken off in years, I powered on my personal laptop, and I opened a blank file. At the top, I typed one word: Travant. It came from Latin, traversare, to cross over. That's what it felt like. Not escape, not revenge, a crossing. I filed the LLC paperwork that week, quietly. No advisors, no investors, no noise. Just a legal name and a blank charter. But the idea? The idea was loud. I began reaching out to people. Discreetly, carefully. Jenna Park, former legal strategist. Brilliant, disciplined, ethically unshakable. Pushed out after raising questions about vendor sourcing. Raheem Silva, systems architect. Designed 3 of Venturon's core integration tools before being replaced by a more scalable solution, which, funnily enough, was just his code with someone else's watermark. Noah Ton, finance whisperer, had built the model that warned us of the Eurocom dip 2 quarters before it happened. He was passed over for promotion after asking to lead his own team. They weren't just colleagues, they were survivors. We met after hours. In small restaurants, private Slack channels, encrypted video calls, I shared my vision, my sketches, my dissatisfaction. And slowly, they started sending things back. Mock-ups, flowcharts, compliance drafts, frameworks for customer feedback loops. We didn't want to beat Venturon at their own game. We wanted to play a different one entirely. Travent would be everything they claimed to be, but weren't. Transparent. Agile. Human. No endless ladders. No boardroom politics. No nepotism. Just work that mattered. Led by the people who knew how to do it. We weren't just building software. We were building trust. From the first conversation to the final contract. We had no office. No logo. No press release. We had something better. Each other. Every person on that founding team had been silenced, sidelined, or stripped of credit. And now, in secret, we were building something no one could steal. I didn't tell a soul at Venturon. I smiled in meetings. I nodded at Mallory. I answered late-night emails. I played the part. But beneath that calm exterior, Travent was growing. Not as a threat, as a promise. Because I had given them years of loyalty. And now I was giving that loyalty to myself. São Paulo was the final stop. 10 months of negotiation, 35 flights, and more coffee than I could count had led me here. To a boardroom with too much glass and not enough oxygen. 22 floors above a city that pulsed with traffic, heat, and quiet momentum. The Trident deal was days from closing. $2.5 billion. 3 international giants merging systems, strategy, and infrastructure. It was a feat that took whispers in Tokyo, corrections in London, and late-night compromise across every legal department I could reach. And now that the finish line was in sight, Venturon had parachuted in the photo crew. Grayson flew in that morning. Mallory, too, dressed like she'd Googled executive chic the night before and bought the first linen suit she saw. She wore it like armor, and it still didn't quite fit. I let her talk through the opening remarks to Brasslink's board, watched her fumble names, mix up jurisdictions, mispronounce data parity. Grayson didn't correct her. He just smiled tightly, the way executives do when their legacy is on the line. And I sat at the side, hands folded, mouth still, waiting, because I knew what would come next. When the real questions started, when the CTO asked about zero-trust architecture, when the CFO flagged compliance blind spots, when the COO said, "Your proposal still doesn't address cross-border latency," they all turned to me. Even Mallory, especially Mallory. She looked at me like I was her contingency plan. And in a way, I was. The problem was, I hadn't signed up for that anymore. I answered every question, clean, calm, precise. I showed the fallback protocols I had built myself. I referenced encryption layers by spec code. I quoted legislation and restructured our risk model on a notepad in real time. The room quieted. The tension shifted. Brasslink's legal lead, who had barely blinked all morning, sat up straighter. Someone took notes for the first time. This was my moment, not theirs. After the session, the room thinned out. Some executives stayed behind to call drivers or finish their espresso. Grayson excused himself for a sync with Mallory, likely a damage control huddle to find a way to make her stumble look like a learning opportunity. I stayed seated, cross-legged in my chair, sipping black coffee from a porcelain cup I didn't remember ordering. Louis Mata, Brasslink's CEO, didn't leave either. He stood near the window, silhouetted against the sprawl of the city. He was a quiet man, but not a passive one. His silence held weight. When he spoke, people stopped typing. And then he turned, walked back to the table, sat directly across from me, and asked it, "Why don't you run the company?" I froze for half a second. That's all it took for the words to break me open from the inside. He didn't say it as a compliment. He said it like a question he'd already answered himself. "You speak like a leader," he said. "Not a proxy, not an assistant, like someone who owns the room." I didn't answer right away. I stared down into the rim of my coffee cup as if it held some magic explanation. It didn't. I lifted my eyes to meet his. "Because someone else inherited it," I said. My voice was calm, but it cracked in the middle, just slightly. He nodded. "But you built it." It wasn't just an observation. It was confirmation. It was the echo of a truth I had been trying to ignore for months. Even clients saw it. They saw the gap between the one who did the work and the ones who soaked up the credit, between the strategist and the legacy, between me and the people Grayson kept pushing to the front of the room. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this moment was never about power. It was about permission. Because the world wasn't waiting for me to get promoted. It was waiting for me to stop asking, stop closing for others, Charlotte. Close something for yourself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the hotel balcony in my blouse and trousers, barefoot, watching São Paulo glitter and thrum below. My second laptop, my real one, rested on the table behind me, open to Trevant's project board. The prototype compliance engine we were designing with Jenna. The infrastructure diagrams Raheem had just uploaded. A draft pitch note from Noah that read, "Real tech, real teams, real trust." I clicked on the secure chat. The team was scattered across time zones, but someone was always awake. I typed a single line, "We're not waiting anymore." Then I added, "We're going to finish the build, get ready." Because what Luaz had said, what I already knew, what my bones had been whispering to me for years, was true. I wasn't born to be someone else's closer. I was meant to build something of my own. And they were about to see what happens when the person they kept out of the spotlight brings her own floodlights. The invitation had been printed on thick cream cardstock, too expensive for something so insulting. Venturon Technologies, a celebration of growth and global vision. Cocktail attire, champagne reception. Thursday, 7:00 p.m. At first, I thought it was a corporate networking event. A thank you, maybe. A final push to dazzle the Trident clients before we moved to the signing table. But then the rumors solidified. Whispers hardened into calendar alerts. It wasn't a celebration for the company. It was for Mallory. I arrived at 6:58 p.m., not because I wanted to, but because punctuality was the last shard of dignity I still controlled. The event was held in the Grand Armitage Ballroom, 3 blocks from headquarters. Gold trim on the walls, a quartet playing Bach in the corner, glasses catching the chandelier's light like tiny starbursts. There were name cards at the welcome table. Mallory's was framed. I stood still for a beat too long, hands clutching the clutch I hadn't meant to bring. I smiled when someone from marketing greeted me. "So good to see you, Charlotte," as if they hadn't just left me off the new org chart the week before. Inside, the air was heavy with roses and image control. The crowd was made up of executives, client liaisons, and just enough junior staff to make it seem casual. Waiters moved like shadows, trays of champagne balanced between fingertips. Everything was beautiful. Everything was hollow. And then I saw her. Mallory stood beneath a gold-lit arch, radiant in a navy sheath dress. Her hair was swept back, soft waves catching the light. She held a glass like it belonged to her. She was already being photographed, already being celebrated. The new Vice President of International Strategy. My role, my department, my legacy. All of it, handed to a woman who had once asked me what multi-jurisdictional compliance meant during a client lunch in Geneva. I took a flute from a passing tray. The bubbles fizzed too quickly. The stem was warm in my hand. For a while, I just watched. I saw familiar faces nodding, laughing, pretending they hadn't watched me build the very foundation Mallory now stood on. Even the good ones, Jared from legal, Maria from procurement, they smiled and stayed quiet. I didn't blame them. Everyone has rent. Then the lights dimmed slightly. The soft ding of a microphone being tested. A hush. Grayson stepped onto the small stage. He looked comfortable. He always did in a suit. The kind of man who could fire someone and still ask for their golf recommendation without flinching. He smiled, motioned toward Mallory. "We're here tonight," he said, "to celebrate vision. Courage, the future of Venturon." Applause. Mallory has shown in these past months that she is ready, not just to take on responsibility, but to shape the very heart of our international strategy. She has worked closely with our most complex deals, our most demanding clients. She has proven herself a force. I took a sip of champagne. It tasted like battery acid. She will now lead the global strategy team into our next chapter. Another round of applause. The PR team clapped the loudest. I lowered my glass, but then he looked at me. "And of course," Grayson added, his voice softening into that patronizing tone he saved for women who refuse to smile on cue. "None of this would be possible without the person who shaped so much of this foundation. Charlotte will be helping Mallory transition into the role over the coming months. Her experience, her wisdom, will be invaluable." I heard the words, but what I felt was the floor drop. I was no longer a strategist. I was a stepping stool. I was the silent whisper behind Mallory's manufactured success story. The crowd clapped politely. Some turned toward me. I smiled the kind of smile that leaves bruises on your gums. I raised my glass slightly, nodded as if this hadn't just been the final humiliation, the final theft, not just of credit, but of legacy, because this was never about titles. It was about story. And mine was being rewritten without me. Mallory approached after the speech. She hugged a few board members, laughed like the world had finally given her what it owed. Then she spotted me. "Charlotte!" she beamed, walking over, glass in hand. "Wasn't that sweet of Dad?" Dad. Not Grayson, not the CEO. Dad. I nodded once. She leaned in conspiratorially. I hope we can find time to walk through the Breast-Link handoff this week. I've been reviewing your notes, but, it's always better from the source. The source. I was no longer the strategy. I was a source. A quote to be lifted. A narrative device. Well, I said quietly, you'll find some things are harder to paraphrase than others. She blinked, then smiled again. That rehearsed smile, like someone rebooting a presentation. I didn't stay long after that. I slipped away from the main floor, through a side hallway, out into the crisp city night. I stood on the steps, the lights of the ballroom glowing through the frosted windows behind me. I opened my clutch, pulled out my phone. One notification blinked from the encrypted app Jenna had built. Staging server is ready, contracts mapped, you're clear. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed, go. They thought they were giving me an assistant role. They didn't realize I had already walked out the front door. Because you can't mentor your replacement when you've already moved on. And Mallory? She was inheriting a department with no map. Because I was taking the compass with me. There's a certain kind of performance you get used to in corporate life. The right shoes. The calm nod. The signature on the bottom of the email that doesn't mean what it used to. I had mastered it long ago. But now I wore it like a borrowed coat. Polite, presentable, and entirely not mine. I walked through airports with Venturon's name on my boarding passes, sat in business class with their itineraries, booked hotels on their corporate cards. But every conversation I had was for Trevant. We were in the final phase of the Trident merger. The moment when things go quiet before a signature, when silence starts to hum like a warning. That's when nerves show, when people reveal who they trust and who they don't. And trust, I learned, didn't follow titles. It followed memory. Tokyo came first. Telnova's boardroom was sleek and silent, 12 floors above a world moving at triple speed. Their CTO, Nakamura, was sharp, quiet, and famously skeptical. He had voiced concerns over encryption vulnerabilities, latency issues, and worst of all, Venturon's lack of regional flexibility. Too rigid, he'd said once, during an earlier call. They don't adapt. They just insist. But that day, I came prepared. Not with a slide deck, with a live demo. I opened a slim tablet and walked Nakamura through our back-end audit trail. Live simulations I'd built myself in an overnight hotel sprint. Japanese data centers, regional latency maps, real-time logs, everything tuned to his specs. No fluff, no bluff. He watched for 10 minutes in silence. You wrote this? He finally asked. I nodded. I designed the framework, my team did the build. He tapped the edge of the table. You speak like it's your product. I looked him in the eye. It is. He paused, then smiled, just slightly. When I left, he walked me to the elevator. A first. London was colder, not just the weather, the mood. Eurocom's legal team had spent weeks tearing into the deal with a scalpel. The room was lined with paper, red lines everywhere, clause-by-clause scrutiny. Their director, Margaret Thorne, was known for being surgical and unapologetic. She didn't greet me with a smile. I hope you've had coffee, she said. This will be a long one. I had 3. I was ready. We sat across from each other for 6 hours. She pointed out every inconsistency, every conflict with UK law, every clause that felt Americanized and lazy. I didn't defend the original draft. I rewrote it. On her whiteboard, by hand. Shift the indemnity ceiling here. Move arbitration to neutral jurisdiction. Merge the compliance definitions under shared governance. She watched, arms folded. Most executives don't carry pens, she muttered. I smiled. Most executives don't carry consequences. By the end of the meeting, the new draft was cleaner, stronger. Ours. She walked me out with a sealed envelope and a look I hadn't seen before. Respect. São Paulo was the pressure point. Breast-Link's team had grown silent in recent weeks. Too silent. They hadn't responded to Mallory's outreach, had postponed 2 scheduled reviews. It didn't take a genius to read between the lines. I requested a private meeting. They gave me 20 minutes. Their CFO, Victor Mendez, met me in a glass-walled office with 2 assistants and a stack of flagged documents. He didn't waste time. Why has Clause 10 changed from joint discretion to unilateral right? That was legal, I said. We'll revert. Why is Mallory's team suggesting a phased rollout when we agreed on a full launch? I paused. Because they don't understand your capacity. I do. He leaned back, studied me. And will you still be our point of contact? I could have lied. Instead, I said, you'll have my number as long as you want it. That was all he needed. By the time I left Brazil, my message history was filled with quiet check-ins from C-suite leaders, questions, clarifications, reassurances. They weren't asking Venturon. They were asking me. I was still using their email signature, but I'd already changed my tone. Every document I revised, every contract I touched, every person I persuaded. I wasn't thinking about their press releases. I wasn't thinking about what looked good in a quarterly report. I was thinking like a founder, like someone who was going to have to inherit these deals, maintain them, scale them. I knew every compromise Venturon was willing to make, and I knew which ones I wouldn't. When I negotiated compliance terms, I wrote in flexibility. Because Trevant would be global, but not generic. When I rebuilt service clauses, I protected the client. Because Trevant would win trust not through margins, but through truth. When I answered late-night calls from nervous CTOs, I didn't calm them with protocol. I calmed them with presence. And slowly, a shift began to happen. Clients no longer referred to me as Venturon's strategist. They said, talk to Charlotte. She'll know what to do. I had become the company, without a company. But that was changing. Back in New York, I stepped into my apartment, dropped my bags, and powered on the matte black laptop. The dashboard loaded. Trevant contracts in staging. 7 pilot clients pre-approved. 4 active contributors. 11. Soft launch. 3 weeks. Everything was aligning. All that remained? One push. And once I made it, there would be no turning back. But here's the thing. I didn't want to. The plane rose slowly into the dark, quiet sky, as if it, too, was unsure what came next. I had taken this flight before, São Paulo to New York, a direct red-eye designed for global executives who needed to arrive bleary but functional. First class was nearly empty. The only sounds were the hum of the engines, the subtle rustling of newspapers no one really read, and the soft clinks of glasses filled with wine too expensive to taste. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I had just closed the biggest deal of my life, and I did it wearing the wrong company's colors. The Trident merger was officially signed. Telnova, Eurocom, Brassilink, 3 titans of infrastructure and fintech now locked into a seamless, shared platform. They would share data, collaborate on cloud architecture, and use Venturon's backbone to build the future. On paper, it was Venturon's victory. But everyone in those rooms knew who made it happen. Not Grayson, not Mallory. Me. And yet, somewhere over the Atlantic, it happened. It began subtly. First, a Slack message failed to send. Then, my calendar app refreshed with no content. I tried reloading the company portal. Session expired. Re-authentication failed. I opened my work laptop. Tried again. Access denied. My fingers paused. My inbox, previously filled with urgent messages, review pings, calendar invites, had been signed out. Completely. I clicked the login again. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. Venturon. Device access revoked. Just that. One cold, clean notification. No call, no explanation, not even an HR formality. They had fired me, mid-air. I stared at the glowing screen as if it had betrayed me, and in a way, it had. But I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I didn't feel the earth-shattering disorientation I'd always imagined came with a fall this steep. Instead, I felt something else. Clarity. Not the kind that comes from vindication or anger. The kind that comes when there's finally nothing left to salvage. I looked out the window. Below us, clouds blanketed the sea like smoke on glass. Above, the sky was ink-dark and endless. I had been erased in the quietest way possible. No confrontation, no ceremony, no accountability. That was the beauty of power at the top. It lets cowards hide behind clean exits. But I had prepared for this. Weeks ago, after the gala, I had made peace with the fact that this day might come. The moment they realized I was no longer theirs. The moment they understood I was never going to play the second act to their manufactured legacy. I reached under the seat and pulled out my bag. Not the one they'd issued, my own. From it, I slid out the matte black laptop. Sleek, unbranded, cold to the touch. This wasn't company issued. This wasn't corporate property. This was mine. I powered it on. The startup screen was blank. Then it blinked alive, revealing an interface few had ever seen. Travant Systems, Core Admin Terminal. It was all there. Encrypted backups of the Trident contracts. Versions of every revised clause. Timestamps. My own notes from meetings, marked with legal context, client sentiment, and internal objections. Recordings of off-the-record conversations where trust was built in whispered assurances. Code snippets from Raheem. Risk model overlays from Noah. Compliance rewrites from Jenna. But more than data, what I had was trust. The kind of trust that doesn't expire with an email domain. I clicked into the first pilot contract. The one with Telnova. The one Nakamura had agreed to mirror for early testing, provided Charlotte oversees the integration personally. Then I checked the London draft. Margaret Thorne's legal feedback had been folded into a new template, one we'd offer through Travant's early access rollout. And São Paulo? I had Victor Mendes' email flagged with a single tag. Ready. I opened a blank message. The cursor blinked at me like a heartbeat. This wasn't a revenge move. This was resurrection. I wasn't responding to Venturon's insult. I was fulfilling a promise I had already made to myself. They thought they could erase me mid-air. What they didn't realize was, I had never been on their flight path. I was building something bigger, something mine, something inevitable. I looked at the message box again, paused, and then, slowly, with the kind of calm that comes only after surviving your own funeral, I typed 3 words. Let's begin. When I landed in New York, the city was still asleep. It was just past 5 a.m., and the air was thick with early spring dampness, the kind that clings to your coat and makes the whole world feel half awake. I stepped into the terminal without a single text from Venturon. No check-in, no exit interview, just silence. Good. By 6:17 a.m., I was back in my apartment. I dropped my bag by the door, made a cup of coffee, and sat by the window as the skyline turned gray-blue. Somewhere in Midtown, the Venturan offices would be lighting up, executives waking, emails queued, meetings ready to begin. They didn't know yet, but the storm had already started. At 6:45 a.m., I opened my laptop. Not the work one, the real one. The Travant dashboard loaded with a quiet hum. Status indicators. Green. Secure. Ready. I clicked into the communications module. 3 names, 3 clients. Telnova, Japan, Eurocom, UK, Brasilink, Brazil. I didn't draft formal letters, no logos, no pitch decks, just a sentence, 12 characters. The door is open. No explanation, no attachment, just an invitation. Then I hit send, and I waited. Not long. By 7:03 a.m., I received the first reply, from Nakamura, Tokyo. Subject. RE. The door is open. Message. Understood. I will walk through it. At 7:17 a.m., Margaret Thorne replied from London. Subject. The door is open. Message. Let's talk structure, privately. And at 7:41 a.m., just as the sun cracked between the buildings, Victor Mendes wrote from São Paulo. Subject. RE. The door is open. Message. About time. That was it. No press release, no press at all. But across time zones, something was unraveling. 8:12 a.m. Venturon HQ, Grayson sat down to his first coffee of the day. Mallory was late, again. But that wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the growing silence. His assistant, Carla, came into his office with a pale face and a printed report in hand. None of the Trident clients are answering. He frowned. What do you mean? They've gone dark. Telnova pulled out of the integration meeting. Eurocom canceled today's call. Brassilink hasn't responded in 16 hours. He reached for his phone. Dialed Margaret in London. Voicemail. He tried Victor, disconnected. Nakamura? Silence. Panic at first didn't look like panic. It looked like repetition. More emails, more calls, more confused assistants whispering into earpieces. But by 10 a.m., the escalation meetings had begun. The IT team confirmed the shared drive with Telnova had been severed. Legal flagged clause 4.7, termination for cause, had been triggered. No one knew why. Until someone from legal forwarded an email from Eurocom's external counsel. Venturon no longer represents us. You are done. 6 words. No explanation, no compromise. It hit them like a slap across the face. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. No shouting, no lawsuits, just a withdrawal of consent, a full, silent rejection. The Trident deal, months of preparation, billions in value, the project they had planned to crown Mallory with, was disintegrating. And they couldn't reach anyone to stop it. By noon, the board was briefed. Grayson demanded answers. Mallory blinked back confusion. I don't understand. We had everything signed. No one said what they were all thinking. That she had never really had anything. I had. And now it was gone. By 3:00 p.m., word had leaked inside the company. Slack channels were buzzing. Departments froze. And me? I was in a quiet cafe in Soho. Laptop open, coffee warm, sun on my neck. I wasn't watching the fire spread. I had already moved on from the ashes. It started with a single line. Trident announces successful signing of 3 global clients in $2.5 billion strategic alignment. No adjectives, no embellishment, just truth. By 9 a.m., the press release was live. It hit the wires like a whispered detonation. 3 names confirmed: Telnova, Eurocom, Brassilink. 3 clients that, until 48 hours ago, had been the crown jewels of Venturon's portfolio. Now, they were ours. Trident hadn't hired a PR firm. We hadn't done interviews or staged glossy photo shoots. We didn't even hold a press event. The release went out on a Tuesday, in plain font, from an unbranded email account with a single-line summary and a contact number that rang directly to Jenna. But that didn't matter, because the numbers spoke louder than the polish. $2.5 billion. Signed, shifted, gone. And suddenly, we weren't just a rumor anymore. We were a threat. The headline spread like gasoline through the tech and business press. Who is Trident, and why is Venturon bleeding? Sources confirm Trident has absorbed Venturon's largest clients in strategic coup. Quiet powerhouse Trident signs 2.5B deal as Venturon stumbles. By midday, every analyst in the market was scrambling for answers. Their articles speculated. A shadow acquisition? A rogue exec? Some suggested insider sabotage. Others guessed it was a leak. But the truth was far simpler. The clients left, quietly, deliberately, and they didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not to Grayson, not to Mallory, not to the shareholders now demanding emergency calls and revised guidance. Venturon spiraled. Within hours, their stock dipped 11%. Internal chat logs were leaked. Employees started circulating a document titled The Marine Exit Timeline. People were asking the same question over and over. How did she do this? And the answer was infuriatingly clean. In silence. There were no threats, no ultimatums, no grand speeches. I hadn't burned bridges. I'd simply built a better one. And when the moment came, the people who walked across it didn't shout. They just left. At Venturon HQ, chaos became ritual. Grayson held emergency board meetings, called in legal, attempted to invoke non-compete clauses that didn't apply, tried, foolishly, to frame it as a client poaching incident. But none of it stuck. The clients had made independent decisions. The contracts were clean. The break was surgical. Everywhere he turned, doors were closing. And worse, no one would tell him why. Mallory, flustered, red-eyed, mascara smudged, stood in the hallway outside the executive suite, whispering into her phone, trying to reach someone, anyone from Brassilink. Victor never called back. Nakamura stopped answering. Margaret forwarded a formal notice of transition. There was no drama, only absence, like a room suddenly missing its walls. And in that vacuum, the silence spoke louder than any scandal. Because when people leave you with no explanation, no emotion, no trace, it's not revenge, it's freedom, and it terrifies the ones who expected control. Meanwhile, I sat across from my new team in a sunlit studio on the Lower East Side. No stage, no suits. Just 11 people who had once been cast aside, now leaning over laptops, whiteboards, coffee cups. Jenna was finalizing legal frameworks. Noah ran financial simulations in the background, half laughing at the models already outperforming Venturon's projections. Raheem mapped server scaling protocols with 2 interns, both of whom had followed him out of Venturon after the announcement dropped. We didn't have floors of glass offices. We had a mission, to build what the old world had promised, but never delivered. Trust without hierarchy, clarity without theater, clients without compromise. We weren't loud. We were precise. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was defending my place. I was defining it. The conference room was smaller than I expected. No skyline views. No mahogany table polished to a mirror. Just a rectangle of glass, 12 chairs, and a quiet kind of tension. I had been in rooms like this before, hundreds of times, in dozens of cities. Rooms where decisions are shaped, where futures are bargained for. Rooms where men like Grayson used to speak for me, over me, around me. Not today. Today, I entered as Charlotte Marin, partner, CEO, and architect of the company that turned the tide. No one introduced me, no one needed to. The room hushed as I walked in. On one side, Brassilink, Telnova, Eurocom. Their representatives, lawyers, strategists. Faces I had met across oceans and sleepless nights. Faces I had earned. On the other, Grayson. Still holding on, still trying. He looked tired. The confident veneer had cracked. He was flipping through papers like they might change if he blinked fast enough. When he looked up and saw me, he froze. "Charlotte," he said too loudly. I didn't smile. I placed the folder in front of me. "Trevant is prepared to take over the integration process," I said, voice steady. "We've reviewed every aspect of the merger under current conditions. We're offering a cleaner, faster, and fully compliant rollout within 90 days. No slides, no theatrics, just the truth." The documents inside the folder detailed everything. Optimized compliance protocols, regional infrastructure mapping, financial forecasts, executive alignment, timeline reduction by 32%, cost savings of 18.7%. I slid the folder across the table to the client representatives. "This is your new offer," I said. "No duplication, no delays. We're ready to begin immediately." There was a long silence. Margaret from Eurocom opened the folder and read the first page. She nodded, once. Nakamura scanned the compliance matrix. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Victor leaned back and said the line that sealed it. "We accept, with one condition." All eyes turned to him. He looked directly at Grayson. "You are excluded from the process, effective immediately." Grayson blinked. I brought this together." "No," Victor said. She did. There was no vote, no need for a formal motion. Margaret closed her folder. Nakamura returned his pen to his jacket pocket. And just like that, it was done. Grayson stood. "This is absurd." Please leave, Margaret said calmly. We'd like to continue with our actual partner now. He looked at me. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then he walked out. The door closed behind him. The silence left behind wasn't awkward. It was clean. I turned to the group. We'll schedule technical alignment this week. Legal will finalize the adjusted terms within 48 hours. Thank you for your trust. Victor nodded. It was never about the logo, Charlotte. It was about you. I exhaled, just slightly, enough to feel the shift in my spine. I had spent years being the person who made others look competent. Now, I was the name on the contract. After the meeting, I walked through the lobby alone. No entourage, no press. Outside, the city moved as it always had, fast, sharp, full of noise. But inside me, stillness, not quiet from fear. The kind that comes from finally being in the right place. I didn't burn down the old world. I outgrew it. And then I built something better. For the first time, I wasn't holding a seat at someone else's table. I was building the room. And when the world asked who they were working with now, they didn't ask for credentials. They asked for me.